my name is Zooey. It's great to meet everybody. First things first, I just want to thank the CSI staff for endless meetings, the opportunity to use program resource or the CSI impact grants. Many of the social impact coaches, in particular, Dr. Courtney Ziegler and Carmita Saman, and many of the faculty at GSB, in particular, Darren Dodson, Jenna Nichols, Jacqueline Ferrogi, Denai Sterenthal, have been a huge help and support. So wouldn't be able to do what I do, or many of my peers wouldn't be able to do what we do without all of the work that you do. Where I want to begin is, I grew up in Bozeman, Montana, and I've witnessed two things that were very confusing. The first is people in my community, in low-income contexts, in mental health contexts, having experiences with police that left them having to deal with the after effects and trauma. Seeing at the same time emergency situations where police officers were showing up with a lot of courage. That unpredictability and that experience of police in different contexts left me personally with a lot of lack of trust in who I was going to get when I encountered police in public spaces. Years later, on the other side of an education in American Studies and Colonialism Studies, I was working in 2022 and living in Portland, Oregon. What I was witnessing is all of this money flow into racial justice, racial equity organizations post the murder of George Floyd, largely from philanthropies and from marketing departments of major tech companies and banks. Simultaneously, I would leave my apartment onto the street and see folks in a state of mental health crises or in the middle of drug addiction, roughed up and damaged by police. So I got on the phone with some friends of mine who are civil rights attorneys and confirmed what I was witnessing, that the state of policing hadn't changed in Portland and in many cities throughout the United States. This brings me to a project that was born out of, like Doug, the IDIF program, the Impact Design Immersion Fellowship, and thinking through the problem of police misconduct with a systems level solution or from an ecosystem-centered approach. The first thing I want to say is I'm going to talk about police misconduct and police violence, not in great detail, but if it is triggering, I just want to give folks a heads up. So the first thing that confirmed something that I was seeing and that folks in my communities were also seeing is that the state of police violence hasn't changed significantly since George Floyd. On average, there are about 300,000 instances of excessive use of force, 1,200 police shootings. This doesn't include instances of planting evidence, of stop and frisk, and other discriminatory police practices. The other thing that comes out of 2020 is after so many municipal conversations about police reform, about debiasing trainings, cultures of policing have largely remained the same. And I say that in terms of the outcomes are largely unchanged. This is to say something that most people already know is disproportionately low-income folks, folks with mental health conditions, queer and trans folks, Black folks, Native American folks, Latinx folks that are disproportionately impacted by police excessive use of force. So the question becomes, from a systems level, how are communities thinking about accountability? The answer is that there are established processes for people to file claims and litigation, and it's an expensive problem. About $3.2 billion, and this is before 2020, was spent over a 10-year period by the 25 largest US cities on police misconduct. 47%, so almost 50% of this $3.2 billion was spent on repeat offenders of police misconduct. So the question becomes, who shoulders the burden? And the answer is largely liability insurers and community members. Across different municipalities, definitions of misconduct varies. In many instances, data isn't collected easily. In some instances, you have to go to a courthouse and get paper documents to get any kind of documentation about police accountability. And there's a general lack of data collection, data hygiene. This is for a variety of reasons. So the question becomes, if reform isn't working, if public pressure and protest isn't leading to changing outcomes, how do we think about solutions? And the answer is, one potential answer is increasing litigation. It leads to larger settlements, and it increases pressure on payers. It increases publicity, and continued public pressure on police departments and municipalities. And the third is it drives better data and accountability because data is becoming increasingly important for litigation. And this is what brings me to Stanford. So thinking about a systems level or ecosystem level way of building venture or organizations that can address different dimensions of the problem. So being in community with civil rights attorneys in particular and thinking, okay, litigation is an important part of establishing the ecosystem. Shortly before coming to Stanford, I had begun to learn about litigation finance, which is an emerging hedge fund strategy that treats litigation essentially like an investable alternative asset class. The social impact potential, I'm convinced, of litigation finance is huge, especially in an instance like this, where sharing some of the financial risk, having a longer tolerance for investment duration can change the landscape in litigation with social impact. The third is, would love to fundraise, do a traditional fundraise with institutional investors, but in the longer term, employing a strategy like Calvert Impact in their community investment note to do a social bond issue so that community members in over-policed communities can also participate in returns on invested capital. And the fourth, in order to do this, I'm learning in Startup Garage in the Stanford ecosystem, is that the development of predictive analytics, specifically to underwrite cases for litigation finance, requires building of massive databases. And I'm realizing that there's a huge commercial opportunity across practice areas. The other thing that I've been finding in interviews with attorneys is that access to justice is a huge problem that transcends just the civil rights space, but across practice areas. It's people who have lack of access to resources with meritorious cases that aren't able to litigate. So the potential for the legal analytics piece is a very scalable business. So to conclude, the question is, what can you do? The first, support local organizations. If you're Bay Area based, the Anti-Police Terror Project is a great organization. There's also an organization called Courage, which stands for Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice. I also would love to meet and talk with folks. If you have a perspective, would love to hear it. Would love to share more of the work that I've been doing, the interviews, the research. And the third is, as the legal analytics piece emerges and hopefully the litigation finance fund, consider investing. Would love to be in touch, and thank you for your time.